running an agency doesn't have to feel like juggling flaming chainsaws. At Schmidt Consulting Group, we help you ditch the chaos, land more clients, and even enjoy running your business again. No fluff, no BS, just strategies that actually work. Check us out at schmidtconsulting.group because your agency deserves better.
Welcome to Schmidt List. Join host Kurt Schmidt as he welcomes Sarah and Ashleigh from Messhill, guiding leaders and teams through complexity with a unique human-first approach. Discover their insights on change, strategy, and regeneration for thriving organizations. Let's get started.
Hey, folks, how you doing?
Good.
So, Ashleigh, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your work and who do you work with?
I work with Sarah.
Good.
To start with. So she and I, our company is called Messhill, and we guide leaders, teams, and organizations through complexity to make clear and strategic decisions while teaching them what they need to be able to navigate those types of decisions on their own in the future. Part of our thing that we like to do is work our way out of jobs because we feel like that's a really good business model.
It is a good business model.
Yeah. And people seem to need it and want it. So we've been, this version of our partnership is fresh. It's a fresh baby just as of this year. But she and I have worked together really closely, extra closely over the last 4 years, but in some capacity over the last decade.
Wow. And now we're here. We've made it official, Sarah. Tell us about your specialty. What part of the business are you focused on?
Yeah, I mean, my journey's interesting because I did some form of strategy work my entire career. I started in advertising as a brand planner back when that was still a title. So I've always had a deep expertise in strategy, but I went back to school for organizational development, which I think is a lesser known skill set or expertise a couple years ago. And in doing so, I realized that a lot of folks who are strategists have this capacity for organizational development. Organizational development is that philosophy Ashleigh just talked about, that you are improving an org's effectiveness, not through change management, but by teaching people skills and capacities they don't have so they can continue to sustain change on their own. So I went back to school for that. And with Ashleigh, I'm able to bring that deep expertise into a lot of strategic challenges. So it's been a journey that is now means I have a couple different areas of expertise, but it's kind of a fun thing to bring it together with Ashleigh.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here. So I want to jump right in with a couple of questions. Number one is, as a time of recording this, it's March of 2025. And there's really just not a lot of change going on in the world. It's pretty boring. Things are pretty standardized. So I wanted to ask you folks, what are some of your clients and the people you're working with, what are their concerns about in today's climate and the things that they're feeling challenged with? Is there a common thread or is everybody sort of unique?
Yeah. I can start and then Ashleigh, if you want to jump in. Like you said, no one deals with change. So I've been doing work in this change space for now over 5 years, building on a long career in strategy work. And when you talk about it, people change is everywhere. That has been the constant for a really long time. So the challenges we solve, maybe change is a common thread, but that's just scratching the surface. What we're seeing right now is I think a lot of leaders and organizations who continue to face external dynamics that are shifting their organization or shifting the problems that they're facing. Similarly, a lot of internal dynamics continue to change, right? So organizations have to respond to both the external and internal. But the thing we're seeing right now is a lot of fatigue. We have a lot of organizations and leaders who have been on really long change journeys. Sure, yes, the pandemic, yes, a lot of our societal climate and the changes that have happened with our political system and But we're seeing these organizations that have been on these change journeys internally and externally for such a long time that the fatigue is almost beyond fatigue at this point. But things don't stop, right? So they still have to figure out how to move through. So I would say that's a huge common thread we're seeing, certainly in 2024. And I'll let Ashleigh jump in here. It feels like in 2025, it's okay, we can't just be tired. We need to figure out what you do when you're in fatigue. We have to figure out a sustainable way to move forward versus just being tired. Ash, I don't know what you would add or.
I think the thing that I would maybe add to that is it is maybe an obvious thing, but that fatigue is not just, oh, my staff are tired. It's leaders with deep tiredness. It's systems that aren't really functioning as well as maybe they did, or maybe they never really did, but we sort of got by with an urgency culture and some drummed up energy. I think sometimes when we talk about people are tired, we sort of think of this like mass employee base who's, ugh, I can't do this anymore. But it's everyone. It's the people, it's the C-suite, it's the directors, it's the managers. We're just seeing it across the board right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that talking with you folks, that the idea is we had the pandemic, which really upset a lot in change and how change management was just even approached or even talked about. And I've talked about this on the show a bunch, which is the funny thing about the pandemic is that bad leadership had nowhere to hide anymore when it came to the pandemic. I mean, it was front and center in every video call, in every Slack message and everything, whereas before you seem to be able to kind of get away with some of that stuff. What do you think has changed in terms of the remote work side of things when it comes to the stuff you're dealing with change management?
And I'm going to pop in and say, I don't know. Sarah and I typically don't talk about it as change management. We talk about this as strategy and systems. And so, yes, the pandemic exposed some bad leadership, some bad practices, but I think it also just exposed some places where systems were getting really weak. And we saw this just as individuals moving through our lives and also in the organizations that we were maybe working for or working with. So now I've lost your question because I was just really focused on saying that. What was your question, Kurt?
That's okay. I just want to kind of understand between the types of strategies that you're implementing, what impact has the pandemic had on the way that things are? Because we just got so many people that are remote working now, but you've got a few places that are saying, you come back to work, you come back in the office right now. Yeah, otherwise you're fired, which is like a great way to quietly fire people. But I'm just wondering, has the way that you've approached this changed with the remote culture? Because you both have been working in this space for so long. I wonder, is there more inherent challenges when doing that?
Yeah. It's funny because our career trajectories, just as humans, have coincided with the pandemic. So I left, we worked at the same consultancy before. And so that's how Ashleigh and I met, was at Zeus Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So I left Zeus Jones like early on in the pandemic, like I think 1 year in, and then Ashleigh had already left, but then we like started working together, I think in year 2 of the pandemic as independent consultants with our own small practices. So we started to form our own philosophy and way of guiding clients through these like kind of tricky inflection points that involve change, and also are times when organizations need strategy, like in a primarily remote environments. Because it was early 2021 when we started to do that together. No one was back in office yet, or none of our clients were. I mean, we kind of formed a philosophy and values and ways of working in a remote first environment. And I would say anecdotally, we are, of course, seeing more of our clients return to office, or return, even if they're remote first environment, return towards wanting to have moments together. I think one thing that has been nice for us, just this is more from like a consultant point of view versus like the systems we're working with, is being able to see what's like the root challenge happening in this system. What are going to be the types of like interventions or ways of kind of coming into that system to help them through a root challenge that are right for kind of where they are? And then when does that need to be a remote moment, or when might that be an in-person moment? And actually not like focusing on, oh, these guys are back to office, so we're going to do everything in person, and instead focusing on what's right for this organization and this group. I guess organization or system is just a group of people. So what's right for this group of people right now to help them move from like current situation to desired future. And hopefully, ideally for most organizations, that's some stuff we're doing remote, and that's some stuff we're doing in person.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not put assume that like the way they've diagnosed themselves and the way they're working today is like the right solution for them moving forward.
Sure.
It isn't.
Makes sense. Do you feel that because of the challenges that they're dealing with, is it based on the culture? Is there one way that's better than the other in terms of the types of work you've been doing, or is it's just is what it is?
No. I mean, I think so. Okay, I'm going to go on a little like nerdy tangent for a moment.
Oh,
and
please
I promise
do.
I'll come back.
That's what a podcast is for, just so you know.
Wonderful. That's what it is. So my academic background and my early professional background is all in dance. So I have an MFA in dance performance and choreography with an emphasis on cultural studies. And the reason I bring this up is because I think choreographing, creating dance and strategy are kind of the same thing. And there's a specific skill that you develop in that process that is really applicable to this like in-person or hybrid or back to the office or this or that. Like some of these things that sort of happen around you, you just sort of adapt to. So it's adaptability. So when you're creating a piece, you're imagining something that doesn't exist yet. You have a vision. And then you have all these things that you sort of control, but really don't control, right? You have their bodies, injuries, people's feelings, emotions. You have the space, the lights, the sound, the mood of the audience when they come, the money. Do you have money to do this? So there are things you can do to try and create the right conditions for the vision that you have. Mm-hmm. But the name of the game is adaptability. And so that is strategy. That's what we're doing. That's what we guide people through. That's what we teach them how to do, those skills that they need to be adaptable. So as these environments change, the conditions change, they're in a position to try and put enough pieces in place where things are still going to not just work properly, but ideally improve. So this is a long way of answering, is in-person better or is remote better? No, we don't know. There's moments when those things are really wonderful and powerful. Mm-hmm. And so the trick in an organization is looking for the signals of when they're working, digesting those, and then adapting instead of just doggedly moving forward with the plan that you had.
Yeah. I'll just add another kind of layer. This comes up so much where whether it's remote versus in person or roles in an organization, a certain way of working, like we use Teams or Zoom, there's so much energy on those kinds of conversations. I think it's completely the wrong conversation to say things in a much more blunt way.
Sure.
Like, we're talking about ways of working and processes, and sometimes we're talking about roles when we should be talking about like, why are we doing this work and what are we trying to achieve? And this is why Ashleigh and I, like this journey for me in particular over the last 5+ years has gone like away from strategy and way back to recognizing that there's a lot of teams and a lot of leaders that have skipped some hard conversations about what we're trying to achieve, what we need to stop doing in order to get on that path, and what do we need to start doing. And that's not always going to be an easy conversation, nor is it going to be easy to see that work through. And frankly, sometimes when we're talking about something like in-person versus remote, it's like we're totally having the wrong conversation. And what I'm curious about is what's the actual conversation that those teams need to be having? What's the root problem that they need to be unpacking that they are like treating as an elephant in the room and instead talking about a symptom? I would just say it's also super normal. Like it comes up all the time when we're talking with new clients where they've kind of like skipped into a symptom as the problem and it's not the problem at all.
Yeah.
And a solution, right? Like I think we see a lot of really wonderful leaders who are super skilled operators and their toolbox are operational solutions. So when something's not quite working, they take one of those operational solutions out and sort of like try to aim it at the thing. But if it's a strategic problem, if we don't know why we're here, if we're not all in agreement about that, if we don't know where we're going, those ops solutions, like a reorg, for example. Ooh, something's amiss. I think we need a reorg. People don't know what they're doing. We've got the wrong people in the wrong roles. Maybe a reorg is needed, but it's not going to solve a strategic problem. So that problem's going to rear up again. And you're going to be like, man, I thought we just fixed this. So when Sarah talks about being really curious about, okay, there's a lot of spinning happening around what type of project management software we use, or like, are we a remote team or are we not? There's something amiss, but it might not be that. So let's just kind of keep digging around until we get to the thing. And
Makes
a lot
sense.
of teams are really willing to do that. They're like, yes, we need that. We can't do it ourselves because it's us. Like, someone else needs to help us with this.
Yeah. And again, they've been avoiding these conversations, like you said, Sarah, in a lot of cases. So they might not even have the vocabulary to have some of those conversations. And I'm sure that's something you've run into over and over again, because again, even especially in like fast growing companies, like growth can cover up a lot of problems. And to your point, Ashleigh, you just skipped right over into the symptoms. You're just growing so quickly, you can avoid a lot of those conversations. You don't have to have those hard conversations when it's a different company in 6 months anyways, because you added 30 people or whatever the case may be. And I've been fortunate enough and to be in fast growing companies like that. And you can see it over and over again where, oh, why are we doing this? It's not really important because it's not going to matter in 6 months anyways, because we just need to hire 50 more people now. That's what we need to do. So I've definitely been there, but I want to talk specifically, Ashleigh, about a concept you brought up before about regeneration and what that means and sort of what we're talking about here, and how that implements into the types of work, the type of work you're doing.
Yeah. So around the time that Sarah was exploring organizational development, I was in my independent practice really rooting, for lack of a better word, in food and agriculture as a sector, specifically regenerative systems, regenerative production. And when Sarah and I, we were sort of like both going on similar journeys that ended up coinciding in this really lovely way, because as I was working on ideas, practices, philosophies around regeneration, specifically as regard to how we grow food and how those ecological systems work, I was starting to see how a lot of this really applies to any system. So it can apply to an organizational system as well. And there's some sort of just like fundamental stuff in here. I think some people hear regeneration and think, oh, it's just the new word for sustainability.
Sure.
In my opinion, it's not. There's like some fundamental differences. Like if you think about like extractive culture, we generally know what that means. We're really familiar with it. There's finite resources. We use them until they're empty, and then we go find new resources. It's a pretty like common way of working. There's like sustainable systems, which are maintaining. They have what they need. They can maintain it over time and shift a little bit, but they're not fundamentally growing or shrinking. They're just kind of moving and maintaining. Regenerative systems are systems that improve themselves over time. So they actually become healthier over time. It's such a fucking cool, just beautiful thing to think about. And we witness this in environmental systems. We can witness this in organizational systems as well, where if we think about people, for example, they're not totally burnt out and depleted. They're not maintaining, but they're actually energized through this system. They're able to come with new ideas. There's opportunity for rest that fuels growth. There's lots of little things in there that really apply to these organizational dynamics. So that's kind of how we came together. As Sarah was like, oh, I'm learning all this from organizational development. And I was like, hey, regeneration, this is all the same. And that's where we've kind of meshed.
There was one point where Ashleigh made me listen to a podcast about trees that I never quite got through while she was on her regeneration journey. And honestly, I was slow on the uptake that organizational development is basically using regenerative practices for human systems, but I eventually got it. I don't know if I ever finished the tree podcast.
It'll be on our resource list. It's a great podcast.
All right.
It's about the mycorrhizal network, the fungal network under the trees.
Yes. The world's largest living organism. I watched a documentary on that once.
Right.
So speaking of the largest living organism, but I think that's part of not to continue on the metaphor thing, but I mean, the way Sarah brought it up was that there's a lot of the stuff does stay underground and under the radar, and people avoid it. They're stepping over it. But why are they avoiding these conversations, Sarah? Like why? Yeah, they're hard conversations, but aren't these like professional business people, business folks
No,
that
these
just
all humans.
Okay. So they're not just some
I mean,
like, robots or something.
yeah, I mean, there's a couple thoughts. I think first that avoiding, the more I've been doing this work, the more I just have a lot of like empathy and compassion. That's just like a really normal human response to either being overwhelmed. Sometimes it's that we have leaders that are super overwhelmed. They have too much stuff going on. And the idea of adaptive leadership Ashleigh referenced is we have these leaders that we're asking to have vision and make it come to life and be like Brene Brown does this, like down on the dance floor, moving things forward operationally. It's a lot. It's really easy to lose sight of all the things that you're trying to progress, even with the strongest teams. I think sometimes the conversations aren't happening because we don't know everyone's views. So a huge thing we do in our work is shine a light on the various different views and perspectives within an organization and bring them to the surface so we can talk about them. Because sometimes people assume that everyone holds the same perspective as them when that's not actually the case. And a conversation needs to be had about that difference to be able to progress forward through it. And then sometimes there is the situations, a very classic, I mean, we're all in Minnesota situation. There actually being a tension or disagreement and not being equipped with the tools to work through disagreement in a productive way. So I think that absolutely does happen. That's our classic elephants in the room. But it isn't the only reason that those conversations aren't happening. People are human. People in organizations are humans. Systems are complex. It's hard to see all the different dynamics and views of the system. And conflict or disagreement, when it shows up, we all want to move through it productively. That's really hard to do. So sometimes it's hard to name that, voice it, move through it on your own. And that is often where a project starts with us, is doing that. Let's all just get one shared view of the situation and talk about it in a productive way.
I think sometimes, I mean, I really do. I don't think we're going to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and say there are very few nefarious leaders, right? Most people are really trying to do a good job. They care about the people in their companies. They care about what they're putting out into the world. And just one example of a part of what Sarah's talking about is I think sometimes this avoidance happens out of sheer confusion. It's a misdiagnosis. So, for example, a leader has a new vision. They're excited about it. They live in that vision. They're like amped to bring it to life. They're ready to go. They share it with the company. And the company, the rest of the people in the organization, their excitement doesn't match the leader's excitement. And the leader's, what the heck? Like, why isn't everybody amped about this? I'm so excited. You should be excited too. But what's missing is this understanding that change is loss. Change is great, but change is also lost. So people are working through potential grief about the thing they were doing changing, fear that the thing they're really good at isn't going to be what's needed in this new future. So it's super natural for folks to not be able to meet that excitement right away. But I think sometimes in leadership, that team over there is kind of like, we gotta fire everybody, I guess. What are we gonna do?
Exactly. That's a sketch. That's a sketch approach.
Yeah, shake it up.
Yeah, just shake it out.
Yeah, so some of it is just rising that to the top. You know what? People are expressing fear and some healthy skepticism. And if we hear this and can integrate it, it's going to make this vision stronger. We just need to surface it.
I literally was just talking to a leader a couple of weeks ago, said they had this great idea, brought it to their team, and the team just completely shot it down and was like, this is no. And they were so tweaked about that. And was like, what? Why? And I'm like, do you have a history of bringing crazy ideas to them and them going?
They might be tired. Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of what came out of the conversation. Is it sounded like they were a little tired of chasing down your crazy ideas that you probably forgot about 3 weeks later. And my father used to always say something, and it's probably too simplistic for what you folks deal with, but I just want to get your reaction, which is everybody loves change. They just don't want your change. So if somebody's coming to me and I've got all these great ideas for the company and nobody's listening to me, and then the boss comes in and comes up with these ideas, then I'm going to be bummed. I'm going to be like, what? But my ideas are better change ideas or something. And I'm sure you folks have run into that repeatedly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a little more nuance. I mean, so there's a framework that I think is like a Kurt Lewin framework first, and then Nobel, which is another not change management, but like a similar consultancy. They created a great framework on top of, sorry, I'm giving too much backstory and giving credit where it's due. But they have a framework around the people you meet in change. And we reference that a lot in conversations when a leadership team in particular is trying to understand why different people in an organization are reacting different ways to the change that's on the horizon. So there's these change champions. So these are going to be your individuals, see it, get the vision, they're on board. And it's like those folks in an org are usually pretty quick. It's pretty easy to see them. There's two different types of folks who have a little more dissension. And I really appreciate the distinction here between like skeptics and cynics. And Ashleigh will correct me, I always mix them around. But one of those groups is they have some healthy, maybe it's the skeptics, some healthy skepticism about that future. But it's coming from a place of, if I can understand the benefit here and that it's worth the risk of loss, I'm game, I'm on, but you got to convince me. And then the other group is a little more in a retrench what your father is saying of, this isn't my thing. I don't want to be a part of this. I'm going to have to give up, in my perspective, a lot of like my current state or,
where I've been here before and nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like giving people the respect that like different humans based on like where they are in that organizational system and their own like relationship with past changes and the power they have in an org. And there's lots of different types of power, not just positional power. They're going to react differently. And I really love that framework for kind of separating the different types of like resistant type reactions you might get from individuals, because some of them are really useful. And that other group is actually not very useful to the future you're maybe trying to create.
And there's in between the champions and the skeptics and the cynics, there's the fence sitter group. And the majority of an organization are going to be fence sitters. They're going to kind of hang back and see how it goes before having an opinion on it. So people are not always for or against. Sometimes they're just riding the wave.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there so many times. So let's say I am a leader and I'm listening to this conversation. Before I bring in somebody like you folks, what sort of homework should I be doing? What sort of activities can I be doing to prepare for this kind of getting ready for this type of strategy? Is it because, again, like I've presented ideas to my team and they've shot it down. I'm just using this as an example. And now I've got this other idea. I'm going to bring in Sarah and Ashleigh to help facilitate this stuff. How am I prepared or preparing myself or my team for this kind of work? What's the best way to do it?
That's such an interesting question. It's so funny because this work is so different from like traditional strategy consulting. So it actually makes it a little more tricky like the things that are coming to mind to me are so like, do you have a coach? Do you have a therapist? Are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah.
So you're going to be like not the weight that's pulling this progress. It's like the put your oxygen mask on first thing is honestly the first thing that goes through my mind, because it sometimes is like some of our work is often, we're not necessarily like coaches, but sometimes our work is suggesting that someone needs to maybe get that support because it is holding progress back. So that reflection, I think, is really important. There's a lot of this that you can DIY inside your organization if you have people with the right perspective or that can hold activity on the organization, which is hard. That's a not easy task, but a lot of the time, our first step is this kind of situation analysis. And it is for organizations that are just like lost in their own water and can't see it clearly. It's the fish and water thing. But if you have people in your organization that can do that, I think a lot of organizations can actually understand their own situation and talk about it in an objective way. They just have to be they have to be objective and honest. Not for everyone, but if you have that capacity, internally lean into it.
I think more often we're finding folks, there's this aha moment, just to recognize that maybe there is a need. So like we see the same kinds of things over and over. If there's been a big leadership transition, this tends to be when turmoil rears its head, right? Or if there's like a team, especially like a team of leaders who have been kind of talking about the same thing over and over again. So they find themselves sort of stuck or spiraling on a decision or a conversation. Or there's some like looming decision and no one's really making it. So there's some like signals, help is needed. The artifact itself ends up being different based on every organization, right? And Sarah and I last year just worked with an organization through a 10-year enterprise strategy as the result of all of this kind of work together. That's not always the thing. It's not always a strategy that's the result. Oftentimes it is. We work with teams where it's okay, we need to revise the mission a little bit. Maybe we actually need to help you through making some strategic choices before you get into strategic planning. Maybe
like decision frameworks or things, right?
Yeah. Or you just have some big decisions you need to make and you don't have a way of making those in your organization. It's a consensus-driven culture. So we're stuck because consensus is a myth. So those are some like signals. So in preparation, it really is like what Sarah's talking about. It's openness. So like I, as the person leading this, am not the barrier, but then it's also just observing. Like don't try to fix the stuff. Just gather data, observe. Maybe you've got some hypotheses, make those hypotheses, consider them as hypotheses rather than I figured out the solution. It's just nobody else is on board. So, okay.
Maybe stop doing things is the way you prepare.
Yeah. Just pause. Look, listen, write things down.
Yeah, there is definitely times in my work as a coach that you have to drag people kicking and screaming to success where, they're going to fight you along the way. And then all of a sudden, oh, wow, this is much nicer here. But that's where I would say with strategy, I mean, there has to be an aspect of therapy to it, right? Because what is therapy? It's sort of understanding of how we got to where we're at, right? So in strategy, there's got to be a piece where you have to understand some of the decisions that get made up until the point where you're starting to work with them and build that in. And I can imagine diving into that history can be challenging to say the least, to where we're at.
I mean, the thing that I think, and it really, I do think it's like the magic of Sarah and I coming together on this, because this wasn't totally clear to me until I don't know if Sarah, you articulated it or we got there together. I'm not sure, but like, it feels so clear to me. So not every mess needs to be cleaned up.
Right.
I think that's a really important part of this. If you know where we're going, a lot of this other stuff, it doesn't really matter. So sometimes it's as simple as prioritizing. The tricky part of that is then practicing what you've said you're going to do, is doing it, is making the habit out of the thing and not like trying to framework and clean. And so what this ends up being actually it can be an uncomfortable process. But a lot of that historical stuff, it does matter, but not all of it. We don't need to know every detail in order to be helpful. And you as leader, we're just offering the validation that like you leader, you do not need to clean everything up in order to be a great leader.
Yeah,
so that's partly why we're called
right?
Messhill, right? It's impossible. It's not going to happen. It's a futile exercise. And honestly, some of that mess is really lovely and beautiful. Like you kind of just let it be imperfect and move forward. You're looking for momentum. You're not looking for perfection.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, that's the key there, right? Because you do have so many people that are part of the team that might not have the entire picture of what's going on. Yeah. The CEO or the founder, whoever it is, they don't have a perfect picture of what's going on. They're far removed from the work as it is, but as a team, they have to work together to kind of concede on these decisions. And I always think of disagree and commit, right? Like, hey, don't like this, but let's keep pulling on this thread and see where we go. Right?
Yeah, it's not the choice. To your point earlier, it's maybe not the choice I would have made on my own.
Yeah.
But I'm going to support it.
Makes sense. I think that's great. So do you think, Ashleigh, that is there a type of organization, like age, size, the location, like that benefits the most from this type of work? Or is it really any organization of any size? Because we kind of talked a bit about bureaucracy being a part of this. So maybe it's not like micro startups or something, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm going to let Sarah take this one.
All right.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this earlier. I do think there has to be some sort of organizational complexity. And this is actually more of a selfish view for us as consultants. We are much more successful and effective with medium-sized organizations because I think there's a certain size under 50 employees too early in their journey where they maybe don't have enough complexity in their system yet to really need to untangle some of these knots. So that's a very practical thing we've learned. One thing, so we've had this hypothesis that based on kind of we'll talk about the last 4 years of working together as being our experimentation. And now we're forming it together into our business partnership. And we've had this hypothesis that we're best for mid-sized orgs. But honestly, we keep disproving that. If I look at the orgs we're working with, we're across the gamut on size. I think it comes actually back to a certain set of values amongst the leaders, because to work with people like Ashleigh and I on strategy work or change work, you need leaders that have a certain level of openness to being guided through a process versus having consultants who are just going to give you the answers, or having facilitators who have no perspective on strategy or how orgs change. You have to have a certain amount of humility that you're one voice and one perspective, but you don't have all of the answers. You have to have some patience because, again, name Messhill, we're kind of saying we're going to not try to hide or stamp down all the messy bit and recognize that mess is part of change. So you have to have some patience and some willingness to believe that. The common thread for us has been a certain type of leader who has some shared values to us. And then those people exist in all types of organizations and teams, right? And if we can find that value, and it's usually pretty quick and obvious to us in conversations, then we can have a lot of impact together.
That's smart.
And if we don't, it is very painful, very quickly and obvious to us. And we have learned.
Yeah, we're not going to drag people kicking and screaming.
No.
It is facilitated guidance.
There's no kicking and screaming. Again, I find it fascinating about the process. So I just want to understand a little bit about how do you first engage with folks in this process? Is there an auditing, an assessment thing up front? Is it just we dive in and we start pulling out wires?
We just make a mess. That's step one.
Get in and make
it
more
even
of a
messier.
Mess
No.
Yeah, that's a good plan, actually. If you made a really big mess, then the other messes they already have look really small, insignificant.
That's the whole game.
So,
No,
I like this plan.
So Sarah mentioned this earlier. We start with a situation analysis. And sometimes that's big and in depth, and sometimes it's actually pretty quick. It always involves people. So making sure that we're talking to, so it's not just we're going to read some documents, but we're going to engage with folks. Sometimes it's anonymous, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's in group, sometimes it's individualized, sometimes it's a survey, but we have to talk to people. And it's not just come and vent to us, but we have some very specific questions to sort of pull out. Sometimes those answers live in the organization already. The thing they need is right there. It just hasn't come out yet. So we're kind of pulling things out. But often a first engagement with us is a facilitated workshop. So we do a situation analysis, we bring that back, and then we facilitate the space to be able to talk about what that is, because that bit is really important. It can be uncomfortable and it is vital. So the steps that happen after that arise from that conversation and that kind of getting on the same page together about the current state.
I think that's great. Folks, I could talk to you all day, and I got to have you come back on the show at some point, but I'd love for you to tell the audience, how can they find out more about the work you're doing? Where can they follow you and find more resources that will help them? I'd love to share that with them.
You want the tree podcast is what you're asking for.
Yeah, that's what I want.
I'll send it to you. No, it's messhill.com. And then either following Sarah Herberg on LinkedIn or following Ashleigh Penrod. I have to say Sarah's writing on this topic is phenomenal. You can also receive those thoughts via the Messhill Substack.
What's the name of our Substack, Ashleigh?
Yeah,
The View from Messhill.
I couldn't remember. We actually record me being like, I don't remember the name of our Substack.
That's okay.
It's very human.
Yeah. See, you're proving the theory right now, Sarah. It's fine. I wish you guys the best, because I've been fortunate enough to work with both of you in different ways over the past, and I just think people would be dumb not to bring you in and have you start helping them with the problems and challenges that they have. Because again, the approach that you're taking is not this cookie cutter framework that I see so many other places using, and it's a very human approach, which I appreciate, and it's human first, framework second kind of approach. And I mean, that's how I like to work. I recently had a client saying, "Whoa, what frameworks are we going to use?" I'm like, I don't have a framework. I'm going to figure out what you need to get done, and then hey, if there's a framework that works in that, sure, we'll implement
exactly.
that. But
you got a backup framework, but let's figure out the situation.
Let's figure out the situation first. And that's what I appreciate about working with experts such as yourself. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy week and joining me. And I'm excited to get you back on the show soon.
Thanks, Kurt. It's an honor.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify. It makes a big difference. And be sure to check out schmidtconsulting.group for more ideas and insights. Remember, every big dream starts with a single step. Keep moving forward, stay curious, and don't forget, we're rooting for you. See you next time.